Welcome, everyone. I'm kind of tempted to say what is in The Big Lebowski, to a world of pain. This sutra just really helps us with to develop the grit we need in life and the tenderness and how we can live in a world which is so, how can I say, there's such a fragile balance, and yet there's the miracle of resilience. And to be able to still find joy and beauty within that when we know that everything is falling apart all of the time. I mean, talk about like live in the jungle and you can just see where nature is pushing up through the sidewalk. It's overtaking the signposts and, it's wonderful. But also to feel our own aspect of transformation. And as my dear friend, she's in her 70s now, she's one of my best friends, she said, everybody I know is dying. Right, we're in that place, really realizing our mortality. So let's go right to our share screen. Okay. Harinama tapa samskara dukar guna vritti virodacha dukkam yeva sarvam vivekina. So the one who's awake, everything is sugar-coated pill, full of frustration and disappointment because we can't get a strong foothold in this world. So the stress and the anxiety of trying to obtain things, by the time we obtain them, maybe we're bored with them or we have something we didn't necessarily ask for, we develop familiarity and comfort with it, and then it's taken away. So for one who is awake, they realize the inherent frustration to life. Today's sutra, short and sweet. Heyaṁ, heyaṁ, duḥkham, duḥkham, anāgatam, anāgatam. Heyaṁ, 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 duḥkham, 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 heyaṁ, duḥkham, anāgatam. 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 Okay. The avoidable pain or suffering that is yet to manifest can be and should be avoided. So as we were chanting this, I was looking at the etymology. Heyaṁ, ha, to leave and abandon. And yam, we know, is the beach mantra for the heart. So, this is a heart-centered sutra, and it speaks to the heart, speaks to the wounds of the heart, and that in life we will be wounded. So, but how can we defend ourselves against unnecessary wounding so that we're not in this state of misery, like, oh, life is suffering, life is a bitter pill? There's the anāgatam, which is that which is near. We don't have to go there. We don't have to dig into it. The avoidable pain that is yet to manifest can and should be avoided. Okay, so so much of our progress in the world, the innovations of science has been to, make life easier. You can imagine, I think sometimes, on big laundry days, it's like, think of heating up a cauldron of boiling water with lye that's burning your hands, and you're using a stick, and, just all of the modern conveniences that we have, and how much we've advanced in that way. So science is cunning. It galvanizes the forces of nature, and we try to simplify, tasks that used to take, going and bearing water. We all know from Randa how that affects the culture and the society. So I'm going to share a story. There was a man and a son, and they were tilling their field, and they were pulling a plow. So manually, hard labor, pulling this plow through the fields. And a student of Confucius walks by, and he says, "What are you doing? Don't you know there's been innovations? What you're doing is so primitive. Why don't you get a team of horses or oxen? Well, you guys are out in the boondocks, and science has progressed fast. You need to come up with the times." And the father says, "Shh, please, don't speak so loudly. Wait till my son's gone, and then I'll respond to what you have to say." And so the son eventually goes to, take a break. And the father says, "You're a very dangerous person. If my son hears what you say, he's going to pull the plug. He's going to be out of here. He's going to think, oh, this is the work of a horse. I can't do the work of a horse. We need a horse." And the disciple of Confucius says, "Well, what's wrong with that?" And the father says, "Everything is wrong with that because of the cunningness. It requires that we exploit the horse, and one thing leads to another. My son, he's young. He hasn't developed wisdom yet. And if he discovers this capacity for exploitation and cunning, he's going to try and exploit and manipulate others. Please go away. We're happy toiling in the fields." So yoga is a whole other level of science. It's the science of inner being. And it reminds ourselves of our innocence, our place in the world, that, as many conveniences as we may have, we are all going to have to do the work. And this simple understanding transforms us. It only seems difficult, what Patanjali is saying here, because our head tends to complicate things. And ultimately, our egoic nature, our unrefined egoic nature, it likes things to be difficult, because difficulty feeds our sense of egoic prowess. So we want complications because we're fighting against difficulty. And then in this way, we create our own obstacles. So what the science of yoga does is it just, clears kind of the interference or the vrittis, so that the ego can go back to its pure nature, its subtle nature, and become more refined, and then build an inner shrine to the divine. That work is devotion. That work is, we're part of this creation. We're not the masters of this creation. So hard work, the toiling, the difficulty, the pain, running away is not the answer. And just be aware that, the Yoga Sutras aren't going to make your life easier. Spiritual life isn't comfortable either. But the yogi desires freedom over leisure, over comfort. And life is humbling. Also, someone who is humbled doesn't know that they are humbled, that they are being humbled. So just, it's humbling. And if you don't realize, you might perceive it as being insufficient, but just know that life is teaching you this sense of humility. So this sutra, we begin to explore, is it possible to avoid struggles inherent to human life? Many folks believe that life is misery and they just have to accept it and make the best of it. But in the afterlife, they'll have some great reward. And so some maybe even embrace suffering, as this form of spirituality. Yoga psychology is saying death is not the solution, and making your life more miserable is not the solution. Just like if you go to bed and you have economic challenges, it's not like you're going to wake up in the morning and they dissolve. Same thing. If you're poor spiritually, don't think you're going to be wake up enlightened in your next lifetime. So the yogi, the wise one, knows that it is possible to rise above one's own self-delusion and self-generated misery here, in the now, in this physical body, through viveka, through discernment, through knowledge, through metaphysical understanding, and taking and owning your own power. So here we are being invited to embrace the challenge of life instead of trying to avoid it. Be as sensitive as an eyeball. See your own avoidance of vidya, your own, maybe, you're not there yet. You're in a process of being weathered, of being tempered, of being cooked by life. And, you're growing into yourself. The ultimate security that we can find in the world is that sense of our own self and our resilience, because in the world, there are no strong footholds. So we're being given tadadrashtuhu svarupe vashtanam, a way that we can live in grounded spirituality, a philosophy, a perspective of life that helps us to manage the unavoidable problems. And eventually, where we're not conjuring problems at all. So how can we intelligently deal with sorrow that's already arisen? If you're still pushing it away, you're still touching it. If you leave it alone, it will move away from you. So we can utilize situations of discontent and observe it directly, like what are the hooks? And it's different from psychoanalyzing it, because sometimes we overcomplicate it. It's more through observing ourself and seeing, okay, if I'm in pain, I've shared this with you before. They say, if you feel far apart from God, who moved? How did you get out of touch with reality? And pain is kind of what brings us back in touch with ourselves and reality. And then we'll know better next time not to gorge on poisoned honey. So Patanjali is giving us a step-by-step process, but eventually we have to take the leap and we have to jump out of the consensus awareness of problem addiction. And Elie Wiesel, he said, in order to fly, you have to jump off the ground you are standing on. So we learned in the last sutra, Parinama, last couple sutras, which is this compressive force of evolution. It just doesn't allow us to get comfortable. Change is forcing us to become more diverse. And this is how we develop our potential of evolved consciousness. So just like in the first sutra of this chapter, tapas, the first ingredient you need is a burning desire. It's really fueled by a deep desire that comes from being in touch with pain. And maybe it's our personal pain, or maybe it's the suffering in the world. And this is the single best motivator on the yoga marga, on the yoga path. So what is pain? Baba Haridas says, it's any kind, and he's actually quoting other pundits as well. Pain is any kind of experience which is fixated on your individual gratification. Please hold this in context, okay? So we know that everybody experiences pain, but not everybody comes to yoga. Not everybody is looking for that, healer, heal thyself, and become a healer in learning to heal yourself. Most people try to handle it with temporary solutions. They're, they fill the void in different ways. They self-ameliorate. If they have a headache, they take a pill. So do I. Okay. Sometimes, it's not that it's a bad thing, but they're looking for the larger issues in their life. They're looking for temporary solutions. The yogi is embracing this as the force of evolution. Like, oh, if I have continuous headaches, like what's going on inside of me? How do I need to balance my diet, my sleep patterns? I know that headache is neck ache. How can I develop therapies around that? And they work with whatever that feed, that neural aggravation is, the nerve aggravation or the emotional aggravation, as a possibility for transformation into new awareness. So the only way that we can let go of this unnecessary pain is through discriminating wisdom, which then helps us to get free of it. And it's where we don't identify the operations of consciousness as being our own essence. They're indicators that we are sentient, but they don't determine who we are. So this is realized through the practices of yoga, right? We may come and, open the mat and be like, okay, I'm going to do my practice. And if it's a functional practice, we center around the breath. And then the breath, which is this unified field of life force, becomes our guide. So we can get out of that sense of ambition or obligation, just by using these metaphysical practices of yoga in the present. We can avoid future suffering that is yet to come in the now and stop the boomerang effects of running away from pain and chasing temporal desires. So this sense of viveka kyati again, this is the one of the crowning jewels of yoga, is that discernment. And to realize that your innermost self is already pure, it's already intact, and it's only the fragmented parts of self that are injured. There's that old Chinese adage that salt only burns on an open wound. So we're not damaged goods. We have fractures, we have cracks, we have all of that stuff. And we know that searching for temporary pleasure is just pain is going to be on the other side of it. And if we're avoidant of that pain, we're going to be living in abhinivesha, or in a fear state. So intelligent and sensitive people, they realize the never-ending cycle of pain and disillusionment. Elie Wiesel says, human suffering anywhere concerns men and women everywhere. So Patanjali says, we have to let go of holding on to these notions that we will be impervious to pain, or it's going to be our downfall. So the last sutra expounded upon karma, the three kinds. There's the already created and stored seeds. It's beyond your control. Things come up and you just have to work it out the best you can and accept the fruits of those, the history. Maybe it's like some kind of a feud, or you were born into a situation in which there was conflict within the community, etc. And accept it with courage and with patience and do your best. The second one is the currently experiencing present seeds that are ripened into bearing fruit. And to realize that what we're experiencing now is also a product of the past. So you can see there's kind of some overlap there. The third type is the pain that we're creating in the present through our virodhascha, which is that sense of conflict inside of ourselves. And rather than seeing that it's like this dialogue in which we're trying to explore all different sides, we feel a split inside of ourselves, which then consequently leads to unskillful acts. So that is the type of pain that can and should be avoided. It's not avoided by ceasing to act. That would be impossible. But if we can dedicate the fruits of our actions, dedicate ourselves to the greater integrity, so we're getting out of the egoism, it unwinds the wheel of karma. We can let go of what brings pain by, reflecting what is going to serve the highest and best good for everyone's spiritual evolution. So we actually, sitting with those questions is painful, isn't it? Because it's not always a clear answer. It's not always a clear path. And when we allow ourselves to experience it and feel how it's renovating our inner house, in that way, we're unwinding the repetitive nature of the karma chakra. So now Patanjali is going to explain what pain needs to be removed. There's adhyatmika, which is Again, that avoidable suffering that is produced in your own body and your own psychology. So we need to develop a strategy to identify it so that once we see it, it no longer has the same hold on us. And we've spoken at great length about that. Prasupta, Udara, Tanu, and Vichina, the repression, the full-blown projection, the transference, and then being able to sit with it and to breathe and hold sacred space. Then we have Adidaivika, which is the pain that's inflicted on us by other beings, other creatures, mosquitoes, enemies, family members, loved ones, difficult neighbors. And it only continues to hurt us if we harbor resentment, if we feel damaged by it. And then there's Adibhautika, this is in your notes, which is natural calamity, and that's arguably unavoidable. Pain due to the nature and environment, earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, drought, storms, fire. So 3 types of pain. Pain that has already happened is unavoidable. Pain in the present is also not avoidable because it's already in operation, but we can remediate it by, medicines, therapies, and through meditation. What concerns the yogi is the likely pain that is yet to come. Suffering that is accruing that will manifest in the future. And this is what, the yogi is really has lucid awareness of. They're as sensitive as an eyeball, where for those who are, just basically living a bestial life, they're just feeding the desires and the senses. It doesn't concern them at all. They're into instant gratification. As I mentioned last week, most people are only aware of their past pain. The yogi is aware of past and future pain. So as sensitive as an eyeball, they see and feel the pain before it arises. It sounds like my yoga practice, right? Just because I can doesn't mean I should, because, if I'm moving from this egoic place, I'm going to suffer later. That was many years of learning, that sense of pushing. So even before it presents, it's in the itaratra, in the shadow, in the subconscious or the unconscious. And the way that we root it out is through psychological analysis, observing, because the way I do anything is the way I do everything. And just seeing that patterning that's within me. Where is the narrative it's coming from? That I have to prove myself, or I have to make my mark, or I'm not enough. It's moving from not enoughness. And so in that way, we increase our sense of clarity, and we're able to learn and yoke those wild horses of our own pushing or avoidance, and to contain those aspects of our egoic nature. There's times where you let it run free and you just go for it. And there's times where you have to pull back in. And this way we can work with the klesha, or the clash that we experience. So the pain that is already in operation is significant. Future pain is mighty. Mishra says, mighty, far-reaching, and relatively eternal. And it can lead to lifetimes, generations of misery. So again, can we see the pattern? We heard earlier about the sense of the arrows. There's the arrows that have already been shot. There's the arrows that have already been released. But, what about the arrows that are still in life that we're ready to launch at ourselves or impale others? And to see, it's easier to release the tension of the bow before the arrow is released. So even those who aren't awake, who aren't as sensitive as an eyeball, everything is painful for them, whether they know it or not. Any pleasure that we receive from, fleeting sources, whether it's a family member, a lover, or possessions or status, is always going to be less in proportion to the challenges that we face. Okay. So when we can develop a high level of sattva or clarity, we become acutely aware of the causes of dukkha when things aren't moving smoothly. And that's that sense of samyak drishti, right vision, where we can see things in their full circle and their completeness. And Nishala Joy Devi, she translated this sutra. With this understanding, once vital difficulties or clashes become impotent. So you're an eyeball, but you also have eyelids. And you can protect the eye. You can close and open that lid. And you're able to discriminate, like, okay, I don't need to go there. I can see where this is a spiral. This is just going to dig us in deeper. And in that way, we can also make choices. Let's revisit past pain. Although it's finished, although it's already happened, for most people, they hold on to that pain as part of their narrative. And it seems like Patanjali is telling us to let go of the past, that it's just a memory. But he's saying, look at the present and how it is being informed by your past. What's already fructifying must be resolved through experiencing it. So that's the sense of tapas that gives us the friction that helps us feed the psychic fire to develop viveka, discernment, so that we can vairagya, let go of it. And sadhana practice is what helps us to, remember that the power that we have and to develop that self-agency. So then we can see where the grooves, and as I've shared, the neural pathways of trauma, they're at least 30% stronger than the other neural pathways. But we can very slowly and systematically and gently work with that trauma network and start to reroute the neural pathways. Then we can change the future harvest and also what we're seeding. So remember, as long as we're moving from those unresolved places, even if everything seems copacetic in the moment, that stuff is going to come up with more vitality. So it's, again, getting clear about what seeds we're planting. What about the present pain? It really can't be avoided. You're in it. You're suffering. And, when you're in that kind of pain, it completely envelops you, and it's difficult to think of anything else. Well, we can at least reduce it, right? With discernment. Like, remember when I picked up the overfilled bucket at an angle and threw out my back, and it was such a simple thing that I could have avoided, and yet I had to deal with it for, some days. And it was like, I could barely move. I was basically maneuvering around this pain constantly. And yet I knew with Viveka that like this too will pass. I have, the medical kit of knowing how to take care of myself. And I also have the preventative medicine where my practice helps me to not just, get stuck in patterns where I tend to recruit all of my movement from certain areas, which then breaks that area down. So we can use self-care, AKA yoga, as a way to strengthen our awareness, our discrimination, our mind, to strengthen our hearts, our immune systems, and to deflect dis-ease. So, yeah, life is painful. Nobody said it was going to be easy. But Venkateshananda, he says, yet all is not lost, because you can avoid the obsession of, having psychic contact with pain, which just brings pointless suffering. Even when you're in contact with it, instead of avoiding it or masking or, pushing away the current disease, or dwelling on past failures, which then only defeats your self-esteem and your faith in your ability to rise above, to grow from this situation, rather than weaken your resolve and create a self-fulfilling prophecy. The only thing you can do is be present with it. Anticipating. So we said that the yogi's only concerned with the pain that is yet to come, but anticipating it is going to create a tone in your system that breeds anxiety. So just as pain is a part of life, pleasure is a natural ability. And that sense of compassion, of being patient with ourselves, where we can sit with our pain, not on it, and really observe the pain cycle. So the teachings of Freud, with the birth of Western psychology, said, everybody's in pain and it's your parents' fault. Then we had Karl Marx, who said, the reason that there is pain is because of the upper class. Yoga says life is the fruit of your own doing and undoing. It's not about blaming, shaming, or explaining. It's about handling the life situations as they arise. Eckhart Tolle speaks a lot about the pain body, which is this old emotional pain that lives inside of us, that's accumulated from past traumatic experiences, stuffed in the shadow in the Ittaratra. It's not fully faced, and it wasn't accepted the moment it arose. And that's the nature of trauma too, is that it's too big for us to handle. We don't have the tools in the moment. It's too much for us to process. So then that leaves the residue of karma shayo, that reservoir of imprints. And it's really interesting because Eckhart refers to it as an entity. And it can be dormant, or it might be triggered by something and become active. And the trigger is something that resonates with a past pain pattern. When it's activated by the ego, it actually wants more pain. And in this way, you are either in the role of victim or perpetrator. You want to inflict pain, or you want to suffer pain, or even both. So there really isn't much difference between the two. So we're invited to explore an expanded, a more profound type of presence that also holds space for your pain body. Again, it's just one of the pieces that we come in with, and it's that it is parinama. It's the evolutionary force. So it's bigger than you. If you can truly observe it, then you can start to tease apart the pattern, or as my prior therapist said at one point, sometimes it's just like a Gordian knot. You just have to cut through it instead of obsessing. You do the time, you look at it, you observe it. Can I pull this apart? And sometimes you just got to break the pattern without intellectualizing or conceptualizing it, and just see it as an experience that requires a subject and an object. And this perspective is what creates the tension. And what you want to see is where the disconnect was. So only by realizing that we're all in this together, we're all evolving together, we're finding our individuality, we're stepping out of the tribe, creating a new awareness of authenticity, of independence, of interdependence, that there's something bigger that's happening. We're recontextualizing the ego. It serves a bigger purpose. And this is known again as Viveka Kyati. Everyone tries to avoid pain. This is not like some huge realization that only yogis have. Everybody instinctually has that. However, most do it by pursuing pleasure. And it's worth mentioning again from last week, what is the opposite of pain? It's not pleasure. It's the absence of pain. And that is the bliss of knowing Purusha, your inviolable self. So what motivates the yogi? They clearly still enjoy and act out in the world, but their actions are performed as dharma, duty, right, privilege, with a sense of honor, service, devotion, and love. So what is avoidable pain? Well, much of it is self-generated. Some of it's out of your control, but how much of it is self-generated? Most pain is due to alasya. Remember the 9 challenges? Carelessness. And, oftentimes, the pattern is already there, but people wait until they're in deep pain before they look for a cure or a solution or ask for help. Sometimes it's just because we're busy or we're preoccupied, or we think this too will pass. Or it could be more insidious. It could be confused values and ideals. So Heyaṁ is what is avoidable. The longer you wait to search for the solution, the less effective it can be. So the last sutra describes the pain that is inherent to life. And now we're invited to take the leap, to take the jump, and embrace that change always feels uncomfortable. and give up that struggle on trying to keep things the same, on justifying maladaptive tendencies. And we do this through this radical transparency with ourselves. So the thorns, the arrows of pain, if you don't touch it, your life becomes one of avoidance. And it's like very time consuming. You have to reorchestrate the way you do everything just to avoid that festering wound. And no one else can touch it either or touch you. So now you're isolated. And now this thorn runs your entire life. And the core problem becomes even more complex, right? It infects our whole system. And most of us have more than one thorn. Or we can remove the thorn. We can, excise it. We can lance the wound. And we're no longer protecting ourselves from feeling it. And this helps us to go to our core self and to, our deepest desire, which is to feel free enough where we can be authentic. Then we free ourselves by finding ourselves. And we know it's like, oh, when you get a bad splinter and it's like, it's going to hurt to get it out, but or a piece of glass, a little shard in your foot, and you have to dig it out. And it's really awful, but walking around on it, walking crooked, or having it just go deeper and deeper. It's like we steel ourselves. We have the grit to deal with it. So to feel, that was a very kind of banal example, but in the deeper kind of pains that we feel, to feel into the energy of it, not from the neocortical brain, which overanalyzes, but just to feel that like, wow, this is something that has a lot of charge for me. What is this energy? And to feel that, you have the freedom to go there and that there's nothing that you can't handle. So it is possible to become lighter in the here and the now. It's not a question of choosing to do when to do the work or choosing to do the work, but it's a choice of when you're going to face this stuff. And so this brings us into one of the other challenges, which is procrastination. And we maybe tell ourselves stories about how life will begin when we finally have time to face that challenge. It begins atha, right here, right now. Whether it's pleasurable, what you're experiencing is pleasurable or painful, it's how you relate to it. And if you can learn from it, then there's a purpose. All right. So in this way, we tap into Purusha, the fact that we have infinite choices, infinite ways of responding, that aspect of our creativity and our capacity for calm and courageousness and to foster reconnection is irreducible. That is your true nature. And this is where we build new ground of self-sufficiency, security, and self-esteem. You've overcome challenges in the past, and it developed your sense of strength and also the very important quality of humility, that you can have dignity even when you are challenged or ostensibly failed, that you're guided by a moral compass, and that ultimately, who's really got it easy? No one has it for better or worse. We're all human. Here's a quote from Joseph Campbell. "The best we can do is lean toward the light. towards the harmonious relationships that come from compassion with suffering, from understanding another person. Later in this chapter, Patanjali goes on to say in Yogasana functional practice that yoga practice doesn't create pain. It reveals it. So patterns that are held within the chitta. And yoga is this practice of exploring the latent, unconscious processing of the mind and the patterns of behavior that we have, the patterns of strain. Then we can uncover them, attenuate them, and eliminate these deep impressions. And as we do that, the veil becomes more and more diaphanous, and we can see that we're pure awareness. So pain brings us back in touch with that pure awareness. And practices are meant to help sensitize us to develop our sense of conscience. So it's about learning, what does practice teach you about your threshold? It shows you how to create natural boundaries. It shows you where you're over boundaried or under boundaried, and to have respect, back off the edge, and to work systematically and patiently. And Rama, in her book, she speaks about how, in our practice, we observe the breath and we see where we're in pain in the body, where that nucleus of pain is, and kind of just spiral around it, fluff that area up with our breath. And then we can eventually bring that breath awareness more into our deep center, our core center, and move deeper into the pose. Then every time we face a new pain, we can feel that sense again, connect with our breath, and exhale some of the pain out. If our breath is shvasa prashvasa, ragged, rough, hard, or erratic, the body is going to tense and we should back off. Same thing in conflicted situations. To find nirodha, which is homeostasis first, and she speaks about it as svadharma, then you can sense what is right for you in this moment. Ram Dass spoke of choiceless awareness as being a bilateral consciousness, where we can lift our awareness out of the contractive states of the egoic mind to buddhi and find equilibrium in the pose without striving, grasping, or avoiding. Then we move beyond ambition and defeat, between right, wrong, good, bad, praise, blame, pleasure, and pain. And we don't let these extreme axioms pollute our psyche. We learn to take feedback from our own system. And by doing that, you develop pratibha, which is intuition that is so clear that it is sagacious. You learn how to read the larger body of wisdom. So yoga is a way that we can do that, right? It's a powerful form of preventative healing. It's an art, it's a science, it's a psychology. We can use yoga practices to balance that vata if we're, nervous and unstable and distracted, that we, the vatas are super, super brilliant, but their minds are so quick, they forget what they already know. Then we have the pittas who forget that they have the power to do anything. They're running so hot. They're grasping and reaching so much that they forget that they can do anything and that they maybe already did what they're striving to do. And then you have the kaphas who have the challenge of procrastinating and to just get up and do what needs to be done. So when we use yoga practices to develop a healthy and resilient psychology and a body that is also resilient, this helps us to recognize the wonders of the world and the wonders of wonders, which is the resilience that we all come in with that shines forth. All right. So suffering versus pain. What is unnecessary versus necessary? What is sweet pain versus pointless pain? And this sutra invites us, like, you can't avoid pain. So what is your relationship with it? Do you avoid it? Do you dig into it? Do you transfer, deflect it? Do you become obsessive over it? Are you constantly anticipating the pain that is yet to come? Are you in a state of hyper excitation and anxiety? When we look at the word suffer, it means confirmation, unattested, and without witness. In the Old English, it means to take great care. The pains or the effort to voluntarily bear witness. While most people suffer without reason, the yogi does so with intention. And the intention is to burn those old karmas, to burn those seeds and open to love. And as Elie Wiesel said, and he learned this in the concentration camps, I shared this earlier, the ones who had a life of meaning, who gave their last morsel of food to the people who were dying, those people had greater health and a better outlook in psychology. So pain, it's everywhere. But as far as the experiences, the particular experiences of pain, it won't last forever. But you get to keep the lessons that you've learned for a lifetime. And Patanjali says, learn to live with pain without it eroding the quality of your life. This sounds like one of the 4 noble truths of the Buddha. All life is inherent with suffering. And then Joyce poignantly asked, but is life worth leaving? So how can we give up suffering that does not yet exist? How can we foster peace? By removing its cause. Heya. Heya hetuhu, the causes of pain. Where heya is the pain, heya hetuhu is the causes of pain. Hanupaya, how you're going to develop a method of eradicating it. And hanupaya vivekakyatir, aviplava hanupaya, constantly honing that blade of discrimination so that you can finally, you're constantly cutting through those cords. We all want happiness. We all want inner joy. We all want a sense of security. But the wise one isn't looking for it through wealth, fame, power, recognition, or hedonism. They gain pleasure through service, through doing good, through being in that place of sattva, and bringing that sense of even being able to offer that compassion to others who are suffering, to bring them comfort. So until we develop discernment, everything is sugar-coated and there's no lasting sweetness in life. The yogi cultivates inner contentment free from extremes and learns to make peace with pain. This is from Elie Wiesel as well. Wiesel. Mankind must remember that peace is not God's gift to his creatures. Peace is our gift to each other. And, perhaps that is the worst pain that we can experience, is when someone else that we love is suffering and we feel incapable of helping them. But we can offer compassion. We weep with one eye and we hold space for them. So I was sitting with my friend again, Paula, yesterday, and she once in a while reflects to when she was with her aunt who was dying on her deathbed. And just before she exhaled her last breath, the last thing she said was, "What a waste." And Paula, she was a young girl at the time, and it was such a profound teaching for her because her aunt had been bitter and filled with acrimony her whole life and had felt victimized and thus became a perpetrator. So what a waste to live in that pain body. If we see pain as negative, we lose the capacity to see those moments as really enriching us and growing us. We're all going to carry scars and battle wounds, but we're not going to get better by pushing it away or trying to forget it. It's through remembering what we've learned in those situations. Dr. Joanna LaPrade, she wrote in her book, "We begin to see dark times as a vitamin of growth, as a process of soul making, of meaning making in our lives." And wisdom, the strongest teachings, the strongest wisdom we're going to get is hard won. So darkness in our lives is potentially enriching. And can we become intimate with it and to really realize that this is our whole process of renaissance? Your heart is more than just a pump. And, I was reading these scientific references where they were saying, where they thought the heart was pumping blood through the body. It's actually what pumps the blood is a biological momentum, parinama, that biological current. And the heart is the gateway that is almost universally accepted in indigenous and esoteric traditions as the gateway to the deepest wisdom. And it has to be cracked open so we can access that nectar. Suffering is what evokes the humanity of the human heart. And in the Bible, apparently, the heart is mentioned 878 times. It's a vast storehouse of wisdom that requires cultivated understanding. All right. So here's a quote from Helen Keller. We're going to wrap soon. "Toleration is the greatest gift of the mind." It's difficult to endure pain, and it's equally difficult to enjoy pleasures in life and try not to own them or control them or manipulate others and circumstances in life. And maybe we can persuade others and influence others. In fact, that's a job title now, to be an influencer. But ultimately, the only power that we have is with our own choices. How can we give our pain a purpose? How can we decide what attitudes we want to cultivate? what behaviors we want to culture within ourselves, and what we're going to let go. So the sutra are here with the practices to help us expand our vision, to be able to find ease in discomfort and be enriched by the serenity that follows. Everyone likes the light, but few can stand the heat. Can we stop being negative about the negativity in our lives? If we approach it skillfully, it's going to free you up and you're going to live a more deep and rich life. So embrace the challenge. Instead of pathologizing your pain, recognize that contraction, expansion, pleasure, pain, they're all natural forces of evolution. Take the lid off and sit with it. And soon you're going to realize that the gaze of pain is nothing more than your own, but it's likely from another time. Forgive yourself and realize that the road to forgiveness was likely paved with hatred, with resentments. That way we can humanize our experience and yield into that wisdom in our own heart. And then that pain shifts to realize there's that deeper longing that reclaims and embodies why you were created. Everyone is looking for nirvana, the place where everything is pleasurable and pain-free. But it's not a place. It's an inner state. It's a place of center that you find amid the turmoil of life. When you're no longer driven by fleeting desires, fear, or status, it's a center of your own freedom of choice, in which you can then have a joyful participation in the sorrow of the world. So what is suffering? It's imperfection. An independent person is someone with self-agency, someone who knows when to ask and when to receive help, advice, or feedback, and to realize that we have to make space in our very full lives for spiritual, mental, physical, and emotional growth. And remind yourself regularly that you're doing a great job at being yourself. So in summation, amor fati. How can we love our fate? If you want to be free of spiritual suffering, affirm and don't deny your suffering in life. Through that, you self-actualize and become the noble creature that you already are. Okay. So in our Divya Drishti rooms, again, I'm going to give you, like a smorgasbord of things you can pull from. The arrows of life, the past, the present, and the future. We can only choose not to launch arrows of pain that are like a boomerang. So, what is the pain body you inherited? And how have you explored amor fati, loving your fate? How have you grown in that situation? In what areas of your life do you try to avoid pain? In what areas do you face it head on in your life, your body, or your mind? How do you respond when you're at your threshold? And finally, have you ever experienced pain without suffering? I'll repeat them. Would you like that? Okay. So what is the pain body that you inherited? And how have you explored amor fati, loving your fate? In what areas of your life do you try to avoid pain? In what areas do you face into it? How do you respond when you're at your threshold? Have you ever felt pain without suffering? All right, so we'll give ourselves till 1/2 past.
Bhavani, you're muted.
I said, wow, what a great share. I'm really interested to hear what you all, what gems surfaced. And I'll kind of consolidate what was shared in our room, and something that I also want to bring back into our awareness, which is where Martin Prectali, he wrote a whole book on it, on grief and praise. And that sense of like, we need to learn how to grieve well, because it's a form of praise. And what are we praising? We're praising, the loss of the innocence, or the loss of that beautiful time of that moment. And we're also praising our own nobility and our own resilience. So that, this sense of like being sensitive as an eyeball is in that place of praise, as well as grieving. So Adi shared something that was so great. And she spoke about how memory without emotional charge is what we call wisdom. And when something is charged, as we've learned with the karma chakra, which turns the wheel of creation, it's turned by the kleshas, the clash. Think about like the cogs, so there's all this clash, there's all this grinding. How can we lubricate it? But when there's a charge, what it does is it's automatically going to be seeking for this kind of, magnetic. It's like a magnet where we're going to magnetize similar experiences. And as Patanjali said, because we're such sophisticated biological beings, our capacity for pleasure is increased, as well as our capacity for pain. And so we're going to experience these things more vividly. And, yoga is trauma release. As Rama said, reverting trauma back to its original form of prana. And the way that we heal trauma is in the now, right? Otherwise, we're stuck in that grind. And what we learned in the earlier sutras is like, life just doesn't let up. I mean, it's always like, as soon as you make some money, some huge bill or tax comes in, or it's like, there's no rest for the weary. So how wonderful that we have these practices, that we don't have to go into, into full collapse that could take years or decades or months, but that we can, it's like right here, right now, I have to like remember my resilience, remember my wholeness, remember how I have chosen to face this difficult path. I'm not going to walk without, realizing that this is my path of self-discovery, and that I can find these moments, in those subliminal moments, in those interstitial moments, that every pose, every moment is shavasana. So in the sutras, how do we come to this place of integration? How do we remember our wholeness? How do we, or samadhi, how do we find kaivalya or freedom within this web of sorrows that is heavily knotted? And Adi said she pulled today this card, but for the grace of God. So earlier, Patanjali said, before you can have samadhi, you must have humility. And samadhi isn't an attainment, it's grace. It's the realization of grace, and it's not something you can do. It's just that life humbles you. But when you can hold it and contextualize it, that because I'm a living, feeling being, I am sentient. And what Joseph Campbell said, it's like, because I'm human and there's suffering everywhere, I am also suffering. But I can also, then as Elie Wiesel said, peace isn't something that is given to us. Or as, no, I'm forgetting his name, from The Road Less Traveled. No one is entitled to peace, but everyone deserves it. That's the fire that we're tending to, that flame. Yeah. Does anyone want to share anything? How about you, Natalie? I know you're in pain. You picked up a dog crate. Your intuition told you don't do it, but you just barreled through, right? I know you're in physical pain. It's such a teaching.
There's many deeper layers, and yeah, just all the stuff that's coming up from my pain body that I inherited, and I'm not blaming anybody, but I'm seeing way deeper layers on me in one moment, not listening to my intuition, but I am honoring that lesson also. There's just so many more underlying layers of it all. And it's happened for me, not to me. That shift in the paradigm is, I think, it's magic. It's priceless. It's that's Karusha, where you can stay in that state of presence with it and feel the feels. And sometimes I try to, not display my weaknesses. And now I'm going to start crying. I feel like an upwelling, and it's just be with it, be with the emotions, be with the anxiety that I think actually like subtle layers of like this, just some nervousness. Maybe I drank too much coffee. Also.
When I was a few months back in that severe pain, and I was flat on my back, it was so potent, because it was like, okay, like when people come in pain to my class, like this, maybe this is what they're feeling. And the interesting thing about pain is when you're in it, you can't think about it at all. And then suddenly it goes away and you completely forget about it. You know what I mean? You're like, oh yeah, it's like that's happened to me, where like a week later, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not in pain anymore around that, where my whole life was focused around it. So then pain just becomes an idea. Even like with childbirth, they say that the mother forgets the intensity of being in labor. Otherwise, she would never do it again. So, yeah, it is a really potent and powerful time, and it really teaches us compassion for ourselves and for others. And at least, we can't avoid pain, but we know better now than to do those kinds of things and to ask for help, right? To ask for help.
I'm struggling because I love surfing, but I was surfing and working also like days, and I know that I should take more days off of one thing, not doing one thing or the other.
It's sort of. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, learning that. Thank you. I'm healing. The healer is healing.
Right on. Thanks, Natalie. We love you.
Love you too. This is very potent. And as you said, meets you exactly where you're at. And we're all in some kind of pain. I think that's what I'm thinking about all the time. Some way, the suffering of the world. That is recommended. So thank you. Love you too. Love you all.
Thanks, Natalie. Anybody else want to share? Andy?
You were talking about humility, and it seems like the ego gets humiliated on purpose. I mean, that's our job here, to go through a series. Our spiritual path humiliates the ego, and then we end up with humility. I was just going to share this other definition of humility that I've been working with. And it says, humility is an attitude of honesty with God, oneself, and all reality. It enables us to be at peace in the presence of our powerlessness and to rest in the forgetfulness of self. And that has the part of it that sticks with me is like, oh, humility is honesty. It's that simplicity of honesty. And that I've enjoyed that one. So I just thought I'd share.
Thank you. I'm wondering, what is the etymology of humility? I'm going to look it up quick.
And humbleness and humiliation. And I think it's humus. I think it's like soil or something.
Lowness, small stature. Okay, wait. Lowly, humble, literally on the ground, from humus,
Yeah.
earth.
Earth.
Wow. Yeah, it's definitely grounding. Brings your feet back on the ground.
But when you see this thing of honesty with God, oneself, and all reality, the honest truth of it is there's no separation between us and the earth and other and God. And it's when we're trying to kind of come through the ego, we create falseness, you know? So once you just are honest, can let go of that striving, and there is pain involved getting there, I have to admit, right? And yet once the arrival feels really comfy.
Right.
Let go, you know, it's letting go of the falseness that we think we have to build up around ourselves, I guess.
Yeah, it takes a lot to maintain those structures, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where it just feels so good and natural. And that's where I love the aging process, you know, it's humbling. And I'm just like, oh my God, my skin, it's turning into tissue paper.
Exactly.
I've started moisturizing. Should have started earlier, but I'm just like, I mean, I can just see it. It's like, wow, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's okay.
Yeah.
It is freeing. You don't have to be tight and taut and perky. And it's just like, this is what it looks like, you know, it's happening to me. I see a lot of people. I was talking to this friend who has a tenant who's like in her 70s, and she just looks incredible. And my friend said, but you have no idea, it's a full-time job for her. Like the amount of effort she does to maintain this, you know, and she was just like, it seems exhausting. So yeah, it's there is comfort. We can
Or that feeling like no one has it any better than anyone else, and no one is any better than anyone else. And or just the idea that we really, really are connected to God. And that's the truth. And that's the honest thing that we can afford to let go because we're being held, you know?
And that's maybe where we find the grace, right? When you let go.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, and this is coming from a book by Thomas Keating, Father Thomas Keating. He's a monk, a Cistercian. He's passed. Anyway, the quote is, humility is an attitude of honesty with God, oneself, and all reality. It enables us to be at peace in the presence of our powerlessness and to rest in the forgetfulness of self. And that's that's not a capitalized self. It's like a small s self. So I think, you can just let go of some of that forgetfulness of that self. Just don't have to hang on too hard.
Allows us to be in peace in the presence of powerlessness. Was that
our peace in the presence of our powerlessness, and to rest in the forgetfulness of self.
wow?
Like have a vacation from yourself.
Wow, that is beautiful. Thank you. If anybody feels inspired, if you watch the videos again, there is space for comments. And if you ever want to put that kind of stuff in there, love it. Yeah. Thank you, Andy. Anybody else want to share?
I'm just going to pop in to say, lovely, beautiful, aging women, thank you for this very rich lesson today. I'm going to go celebrate my yoga students. I'm the young lady. You gotta love it.
That's great.
Have a blessed week.
They're lucky to have you, Audrey, and we are too. Aloha.
Thank you. Aloha.
I'm going to add this one to my list of favorites. This is one of my new favorites.
The sutra? Oh,
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I was just like, wow. Anybody else? Sarah, do you have anything you want to share?
I don't really think I have anything to add to what everybody else has been saying. Well, the only thing that I might say is that sometimes we know how to take care of ourselves, but are not willing to do it. And I was saying that especially when you see how much suffering there is in the world, at times it can almost be too much to have so much going right in your life, and you get kind of sloppy because it's almost as if you don't feel like you deserve to have everything going right, when in some people's lives, when you think about how many people right now are suffering so horribly, it's like feelings of unworthiness almost. And I was saying that it's not something that you really do that consciously, but it's almost like self-sabotaging without really, really purposely doing it. It's just that, for me, it's almost as if I'm feeling guilty for my own happiness. And it's something that I have to really watch out for.
Wow, thank you for saying that. I can totally relate with that. And it almost seems to me that it's that sense of like, even when things are going well, you've got one end of the string, the other end of the string is there. So it almost just like, that's the nature of it. Like, I'm doing great, but like, should I be doing so great? And what about everybody else? Am I being hedonistic or self-absorbed? And it's kind of part of that balance, I think. And then you're being able to see like, but I don't need to self-sabotage it because I don't need to look for suffering because suffering will find me. You know what I mean?
Right.
But yeah, I'm intimate with that as well. I imagine that most of us are. And in some ways, you know, it has the other side too, which is when I'm in a bad place, I can find comfort in knowing that others have it worse and talk about the guilt
Yeah.
around that. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, but maybe
Yeah.
the guilt in the higher form or the more refined form of the guilt is the humility.
Mm.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, that like, you know, when we turn humility in on ourselves, we feel guilty. Maybe I'm
It's
just,
complicated.
it's complicated. Yeah. Yeah. And also accountability, you know, there's like accountability with the humility. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Writing it down. That was juicy. All right. If anybody else wants to share. Well, for the grace of God, blessings. Thank you so much for your time. Aloha.